So the first scenario that we're going to look at here is how Workfront relates to the finance department and components within it. Now, when I say finance, and we're just going to focus on the NetSuite scenario here, not because NetSuite is more dominant than others. It's a popular technology, certainly in many organizations for running their business, but equally this applies to if you're using a Microsoft Dynamics system or an SAP system or Oracle Financials, that's fairly popular in our ecosystem as well. You kind of take your pick and go across that. Generally, the level of problems, though, and the level of users that kind of come into this are perhaps a little bit more mature organizations or medium-sized organizations. You wouldn't find these types of scenarios kind of in smaller organizations. Now, the first thing to note here is that there's two really vastly different groups of people that are involved in this, in making these things work together and in making the businesses work together. The first sort of, kind of on the Workfront side, and you have sort of the assets that you typically deal with, whether those are project tasks or, getting templates or, programs that you may be running. But it's typically you find sort of the operational professionals, finance people, project management, type of individuals, as well as legal. And legal kind of from not in a common scenario or an everyday scenario, but also but in scenarios where you have, contracts that are being managed or approvals that are being met and kind of legal reviews that need to be integrated in things. On the NetSuite side, you kind of find a completely different, group of users. And so it's not uncommon when we're, in these conversations where a large part of, kind of what's being done is bringing together teams that have different ways of working. And I would say that, if the path sort of along anything, one of the things that you need to factor on when you're thinking about doing these scenarios is, changes to the operating model. You may recognize the pain point that, the technology could be, or the processes could be made better if the technologies were integrated, easier or better. But it's also, changing kind of the business process as well a lot of the time and kind of understanding what that's going to look like post-connectivity. Now, we're going to focus on, there's at least, 8, if not a dozen sort of, kind of common scenarios that we run into here. Today, we're just going to really focus on, I'd say, 2 of them, really around the activity-based costing and finance reporting. Apologies, had to move back and forth there. I was having a little refresh issue. There's a number of scenarios that I'd say are, kind of high burn and high importance when dealing with sort of the financial system, NetSuite integration with Workfront. Those are things that are like, kind of managing, how contracts are burning down or projects are burning down against their cost estimation. There's a lot of complexity that's involved with that. Multi-currency, multi-language, cross-jurisdictional contracts. Those are types of things that, we certainly manage the integration, but, today for the purposes of, today's conversation, we're just going to focus on, the first 2, financial reporting and activity-based costing. So here is a very distinct and kind of quick view of kind of looking at what this process looks like in between NetSuite and Workfront. Now, the first thing that you'll notice is, and this is an important nuance, is that it's not just about system to system. So many times people, start the conversation where they say, I need to, integrate my Workfront to, NetSuite or Marketo or Eloqua or, some other, pick your system. And that's true. At the kind of the end of the day, you do need to have connectivity being facilitated in between the 2 systems, but it's also the people that are being connected to it, because it's not always a straight-through pass of, someone on the source system, presses enter and it goes through onto the, ends up into the target system instantly. So we're going to focus on kind of 2 areas here. One is the integration, common integration touch points in between financial system, NetSuite, and Workfront are typically the project and budget, project on the Workfront side, certainly. But on the financial system side, it's often the budget. That's kind of the big one. But there's also the contracts, invoicing, product information that can be brought back and forth or has to be impacted in between these 2 different scenarios. So let's kind of just walk through here a scenario. So let's assume that the mapping in between fields, the business rules, the data quality checks, the velocity of data, whether it has to be real time or once a minute or once an hour, has all been established by Put It Forward. Those are functions that are taken care of inside of Put It Forward, but kind of ultimately, what does the end game look like here? So typically, you'll have a finance person that creates a project inside of NetSuite. Maybe they've just signed a new contract. So you've got a new customer. They have a new contract. There's new products, new technology, or new components that need to be delivered out to an end user. So what happens is that project gets created inside of NetSuite. A flag is set that says, okay, I need this actually replicated, or there's a condition which Put It Forward senses in the change in the data inside of NetSuite that says, okay, let's take this information and now go and spawn a project inside of Workfront. So where the project is created inside of Workfront, kind of as a first step. Now that's often the shell of the project, and once that's been confirmed that it's been created, then the project details are used to populate that. So that can be details which are stored either from other templates or is pulled from NetSuite or the financial system over in there to populate that. Now the details can be cost, budget, how much has been allocated to it, time to complete, any other conditions that may be coming as part of a contract, or as part of a way to control a project inside of Workfront. So then once that project shell is created, it kind of steps outside of the integration for a little while. The project manager is alerted, hey, you've got a new project, or of X name. An event notification goes out to them. Now, once they get that notification, then they kind of have to go through their own steps. That's adding tasks. That's kind of almost independent of the integration. Adding tasks, assigning resources, maybe filling in some availability, or maybe changing and adjusting the calendar. Now, it's not uncommon that, when changes happen, sort of in the design of it in Workfront, updates will flow back into NetSuite to, let them know maybe what the actual project start time is going to be, planned duration, level of effort, load on the team and organization, and so forth. Then, the people come in and start, the people who've been tasked come in and start, updating their tasks, time, effort, so forth. And then ultimately that flows back through. So there's rules inside Put It Forward that are, used to sense when, data has actually changed inside of Workfront, and when an update is worthy back into NetSuite. And then ultimately that flows down into the updates inside of NetSuite, and including things like, budgets and contracts when things have been completed, how much cost, where they're at in terms of actual versus plans and on their spend. And lets the financial side of the organization really understand what it is that they where they're at in terms of kind of spend and activity inside of their individual project teams. Now, a couple of quick I'd say tips or recommendations and things to think about when you approach these. One is, and this is always I don't want to say always, but it's a decent amount of the time, is you kind of have to have a conversation with people to identify what that system of record is going to be. And what I mean by a system of record is where final form master data resides, right? And so in the essence of kind of master data inside the NetSuite environment, you would classify that as account or company information, as it's referred to in NetSuite, maybe the contract and so forth. Generally, it's good practice to keep financials in the financial system and not distribute them across other systems. You may take, totals or, summary information out of, say, something like Workfront, but you wouldn't be storing your actual financials in that system, as an example. Only think on real projects. Sometimes people create projects because they need to, create shells of them. Only when it's a real thing, put flags in there and so forth. Generally keep them bidirectional. Kind of one-way integrations they have a certain utility value, but they generally don't provide a lot of asymmetry in terms of how organizations function and function well. A good one is to and to think about this one, kind of at the beginning, is really about sort of the master IDs. And what I mean by swapping IDs in this instance is keeping the things in sync, right? A project in NetSuite, financial system, what have you, will have its own identifier. Project and Workfront will have its own identifier. They need to be linked. Often you need to create either a master key or a master identifier that's separate, independent of the two of them, or you need to have space to modify the system. So what that translates into is you're going to have your administrator add in a hidden field in the systems where we can write back and forth the identifiers. A fun one, and kind of just to keep this in mind as well, is multi-currency. Often when you're doing financial scenarios, you're dealing with the multi-language, multi-jurisdiction, multi-currency. NetSuite handles those, well in its own right, as most do financial systems do, because they're built for that. Applications like if you're thinking about doing your budgeting and controlling inside of Workfront are generally location or locale specific. And again, it's a good idea to have a control or a mapping in between those currencies, in between the systems, and that's something that Put It Forward handles. Just as a moving on here, in kind of a common realizations that people go through when they're looking at integrations is the change happens faster than you actually anticipate. You may come with a fully baked idea of what you want an integration to happen and the way a business process needs to work. Often that's in reality the starting point, or it's the boil down point to the minimum criteria. So think about when you're evaluating kind of your solution and the way you're going to approach this, how are you going to deal with change, and how are you going to be able to deal with things that you may not be aware of now as they come through. And so kind of common questions you need to answer, or you need to have answered, whether that's from a vendor or your IT counterpart or anyone that's really going to help you, is kind of how are you going to control the data, validate it, how are you going to manage it, just really be able to effectively look and govern the data as it's moving through things. So let's look at the second scenario here. IT visibility in between the project teams. Now, often many IT organizations use applications like Jira or TFS, or have their own kind of project management control systems. Internally at Put It Forward, we use both of these systems. We use Workfront, certainly on the PMO side and client engagement side, and managing our own things. But our technology teams and delivery teams, sorry, not delivery teams, but technology teams and build teams, use Jira. We're kind of heavy users of those technologies as well. But we also find that's the commonality amongst our customer base. And so the first thing to notice here again is that the user base is very different. And one kind of challenge we see with a lot of our customers right now is they always try to wedge each other into each other's technology or each other's tools. And there's overlap and there's inefficiencies when they're created with that, and it's usually not a natural way of working. Workfront works very well for the PMO. And Jira works very well for the IT dev shop because they solve complementary but different problems. I actually just spoke through this one, so we'll move right through this.